certainly we should see the police, whose budgets inflated during the high times of Prohibition, we should see that budget start to roll back, because hopefully we get to a place where police aren't kicking in doors and chasing people all the time and doing all that stuff. And we're spending that money on things that actually help people. Like we have an ailing, broken healthcare system in this country, but we have these robust, muscular police forces. We have like anemic social housing. The state stopped really building social housing or housing of any kind in the 90s. They just got out of the business of it. And now the bills are coming due for that. So we've created a housing crisis and, a toxic drug crisis and all of this through policy. So it's like, if we're going to get out of this, changing where some of the money goes is going to be a key part of that for sure. And I mean, the police have just used the drug war as a pretext to over-police Indigenous and Black communities for decades and decades. And like activist and writer Desmond Cole says, if it wasn't drugs, it would be something else. Like white supremacy is always going to find a way.
I'm Colin Burrows, and this is the Wood-stein Media Podcast, episode 14. This podcast and Wood-stein.ca are produced on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, and Odawa peoples. On this episode, I'm talking to Garth Mullins, a radio producer, activist, musician, the host of the Crackdown podcast, and a board member of Vandu, the Vancouver area network of drug users. Crackdown is an acclaimed podcast about the drug war, covered by drug users themselves. As you will hear in this clip from Crackdown, Episode 1, War Correspondence, it's hard-hitting journalism with a clear manifesto guiding its intention.
And this is our mission, our manifesto. Drug users are the experts. We've survived. We know policy better than the policymakers, we know law better than the lawmakers, and we know pharmaceuticals better than the pharmacists. We're going to punch up, not punch down. That means holding the powerful to account while building more solidarity among drug users. We're going to keep 6. We're going to expose bad drug policy as the reason that we have bad drugs. We're going to show how colonization, poverty, class, sexuality, and gender can make the drug war so much worse for some of us. And we're going to show how criminalization, jails, and police just increase the harm. We're going to look at solutions, like how decriminalization and a safe drug supply could end the overdose crisis. We're going to cut against the stereotypes, showing drug users as experts and activists and organizers, not just the two-dimensional caricatures you see everywhere else. Because drug user activism is the only thing that makes change. We know that nobody's coming to save us, so we've got to save ourselves.
Garth doesn't take all the credit for the success of the podcast. It's a collaborative effort bringing together community members, activists, academics, and journalists to perform some hard-hitting investigative journalism. I will include links in the description so you can listen to Crackdown episodes that expand on the subjects we hit in the discussion on this episode. We talk about harm reduction, the challenge of distributing a safe, unadulterated drug supply, defunding the police, the pros and cons of BC's decriminalization pilot, and we also talk a little bit about Garth's new band, Low Dead Space. I've never done an interview that made me think, hey, where did my lumpen proletariat 7-inch end up? But it was bound to happen someday. This podcast and Wood-stein Media are independently produced journalism that you can support through Patreon or by donating through PayPal at Wood-stein.ca. That's WOOD-STEIN.ca. Thanks for your interest and support. If you enjoy this podcast, you can support it by listening to more episodes and liking, sharing, subscribing, or reviewing them. Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about this area I'm in because it's a small area, it's extremely conservative. Like Ontario is conservative anyways. This area is one of the most conservative areas of the province. So when it comes to drug use and the opioid crisis, anything like that, there's always the almost religious idea of saving people from the bad drugs, the evil drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're doing that, there's not even talk about social supports really to help people so they won't feel as inclined to need to dampen pain or anything like that. So, in your experience, you're going back to the early 90s, right? With your
Yeah, I mean,
experience?
I was a drug user going back to the early 90s and, survived the overdose crisis then. And so this is my second officially declared by public health authorities overdose crisis. Yeah, I mean, I became more active in the last 10 years, but I've always been an organizer and an activist of some description.
Okay. When it comes to approaches to reducing harm, is there ways that you feel would be better to move forward with that do not involve that pretentious kind of saving people from the evil of drugs standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I reckon most people have a sense of what's good for them. And it's got to start with listening to what people want. We have a lot of that savior stuff out here too. We have a government that just released a budget that looks a lot like the Alberta model. It looks a lot like the, recovery first. The government's even thinking about mandatory treatment, so being able to lock and force people into treatment. So they have a big dose of that savior ideology too. But the problem is the coroner has shown that a huge proportion of the people who die from overdose and wind up on the slab in the morgues of BC were just weekend warriors, right? There's no one who's going to be qualifying for a substance use disorder diagnosis or get into a recovery home or anything like that. So even were these things to work, these savior sort of private sector Wild West recovery homes, even if that was to work, and I dispute that, and no one has really good results or metrics or research to show, even if it was to work, half of the people around here wouldn't wind up there anyway because they're not wired to opioids like me and the people on the Crackdown podcast and at Vandu and all that. So it's a weird fit. And then also, if these things do work, it takes years, you relapse, you walk in the door of one of these places and they'll say, hey buddy, you got a chronic relapsing brain disease. It's going to be with you for life and you're going to relapse. You're going to slip up. It's part of the disease. So, you got this program where you're going to slip up from and go back and slip up and go back and take 5 years or whatever until you either get clean or decide, fuck it, this doesn't work. But I mean, when the drug supply is toxic, you'll die in that time. So recovery and treatment is not a intervention that makes sense for a crisis of overdose deaths, which is what we have right now. I don't think we have an addiction crisis. There's no big information that says, oh, there's way more people who are wired than used to be wired or whatever. It's the deaths. That's the problem. So you got to treat that. It's simple triage. And the way to do that is separate people from the toxic drug supply by offering them the same drug that they're trying to get on the street, but a pharmaceutical version where you know what's in it.
That's the next thing I was going to go into because I've spoke with Eris from the Drug User Liberation Front. They were telling me about the Compassion Club model. Have you or Vandu been involved in that?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, I was one of the co-founders of DULF. We've been there from the start. The Drug User Liberation Front is really, we're using that word in the classic old sense of front. It's a bunch of groups that came together and decided this is the next thing we needed to do for the movement. The government was not getting on with prescribing what people need, so we would do it. And so people stepped up and sourced, heroin, coke, and meth and ran them through mass spectrometers, found supplies that we could count on, that we, trial and error, we found some through the mass spectrometer that weren't up to our standards, so we couldn't use them. And so once these were found, we do a small distribution at Vandu and a couple other places every time the coroner announces more dead. And every time the coroner announces more dead, she stops to note that people are not dying from, prescribed safer supply or the sort of things that we're interested in. They're dying from the street drugs.
The Compassion Club model, would it be possible taking it from where it's being done in Vancouver and setting up models of that? Or, I mean, I guess really the government should be doing it.
Well, there's the question is, how does the Compassion Club model scale? And we have 100,000 people in BC, at least the government says, who are like daily drug users, like me. They have to be, we have to have a model that will reach all of them at least. And so I think we need to let 1,000 compassion clubs bloom. The government needs to allow them to exist. Like right now, we have one and it's illegal. And so we need a way for them to be able to grow and for communities to be able to start them. It's still difficult to source the drugs that you need for them. And so ultimately, we do need the state to allow us to like set up contracts with pharmaceutical manufacturers, with a factory that makes cocaine or something like that. We can't have those kind of relationships and contracts while we're an illegal organization. But also the state needs to get involved. The state has a medical system that reaches from coast to coast, and although it is rather crumbly and shaky right now, we don't have anything like that. And so the state needs to make that system available so that people in a small town or a place, or even Vancouver, where that we don't touch a fraction of the people who need it in Vancouver, not even in the downtown east side, We need the state to help reach those kind of people. We need doctors and their prescription pads. We need the state to say it's okay for nurses or pharmacists or whoever to write these prescriptions because, we know what we need. We know what we want and we know what would keep people alive. So if the state could catch up, unfortunately, the state isn't that interested in that right now, and the interest is waning.
I've been doing interviews with grassroots organizations who are pushing for the idea of defunding or abolishing the police. And it's a theme I know you hit on Crackdown. So I just want you to talk about how that idea could be beneficial to work being done to save lives during the overdose crisis.
Sure. I mean, Vandu is part of the Defund 604 network, along with Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other groups. It's a coalition of people who are calling for at least a 50% reduction in the budget of the Vancouver Police Department. And we're calling for that because just over the last decade or so, the budget has ballooned massively. This year or next year, they're going to have a budget of $400 million. And it's just huge. It's a very large chunk of the city's annual expenditures. And with those millions, you could be doing a lot of other community programming. Those millions should be used to refund the social safety net that has been so stripped back in recent decades. So it's kind of amazing to have watched the police budget bloom, and they've bloomed all over, just exploded all over North America because of the drug war. And so if we're going to try and roll back the drug war and decriminalize and get rid of some of the worst parts of prohibition, certainly we should see the police, whose budgets inflated during the high times of prohibition, we should see that budget start to roll back, because hopefully we get to a place where police aren't kicking in doors and chasing people all the time and doing all that stuff. And we're spending that money on things that actually help people. Like we have an ailing, broken healthcare system in this country, but we have these robust, muscular police forces. We have like anemic social housing. The state stopped really building social housing or housing of any kind in the 90s. They just got out of the business of it. And now the bills are coming due for that. So we've created a housing crisis and, a toxic drug crisis and all of this through policy. So it's like, if we're going to get out of this, changing where some of the money goes is going to be a key part of that for sure. And I mean, the police have just used the drug war as a pretext to over-police Indigenous and Black communities for decades and decades. And like activist and writer Desmond Cole says, if it wasn't drugs, it would be something else. Like white supremacy is always going to find a way. But at least I think we certainly should take apart this huge plank, this huge weapon, this huge pointy end of white supremacy. It doesn't dismantle the whole thing, but taking apart the drug war and defanging the police a little bit, I think would help.
In that, the pilot project for decriminalization that the government of BC is doing, I've heard negatives and positives from a distance, but I wonder if you can talk to me about what pros there might be in it or the cons because of the way they're
Sure.
rolling it out.
I mean, we fought, the movement I'm a part of and the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, we fought for decrim for 25 years. The first meeting I went to on this was in August of 1998. So it's been a long fight. So the first thing to say is the state wouldn't have done anything, not a single thing, if we hadn't forced them. So we forced the government to give a concession. And of course, this is how all good things happen, right? Like, this is how we got the 8-hour day. This is how we got the weekend. This is how women got to vote, is because, people in charge don't give us things because they have good hearts. I mean, some of them might, but the system doesn't. So we have to arm twist and pressure and take those things. And of course, they'll want to give us the cheapest, smallest, most nickel and dime watered down version of it that they possibly can. And so the extent to which they give us anything and the size of the thing they give us is always a measure of our power. And this one, we don't have a huge movement that can get the whole thing. They can win the whole thing. Not yet. We're building that. But we have enough power that we got something. And the police wanted a lower threshold than what we finally got. The police wanted a maximum of 1 gram in possession of someone for personal use. We wanted it much, much, much higher than that. But we wound up at 2.5 grams. And so for the government to not cave 100% to the police, that's still something. And we're continuing to fight. Like, nothing ends on the day of an announcement by government. We'll keep fighting until everybody's decriminalized. That's what we want, is a decriminalization of everybody, not just a small bit. The police and the government say, go low, start slow, or whatever, or go slow, start low, or something like that. And we're just like, we don't have time for that anymore, especially for people like of my generation. Lots of people, including my friend Jeff, who just spent years, like a third of his life, locked up in one way or another. Nobody has the years left for more screwing around with jails and courts, even if they're off to the side a little. So, we'll keep fighting for it. So the good things are that you can walk around this town now with up to 2.5 combined of coke, meth, opioids, or MDMA, and police can't do nothing. They can't give you a ticket. They can't, not at the moment, not in Vancouver anyway. They can't even take the drugs away from you, and they sure can't charge you for possession. That's the law. What the police actually do, I don't know. Some of the bad things are you can walk around with 2.5 grams, all that stuff, but not anything more than that. And a lot of people do use more than that. And a lot of people in rural places in BC, they need to go to and from their dealer, which can be many hours away, or maybe they're at work somewhere during the week somewhere else. So they can't be stopping past every day or every afternoon or whatever. So just like people at Costco, they shop, in larger quantities, maybe to save money as well. So it doesn't decriminalize them. And then I'm not sure whether the police are going to follow through with some of their rhetoric and some of the rhetoric from governments that says, oh, we're really going to go after the dealers now. Because, of course, really going after the dealers is what got us here to begin with. They really went after the people who manufactured opium in 1908, and that eventually led us to all these iterations of morphine and then heroin and injecting heroin and China white, and every time the police go after them, and so it drives the market to create something even stronger. And so we got to fentanyl and benzodope, and I don't know what's next, trank dope here, I don't know what's coming. So that could be a negative outcome of it too, but we don't know. And of course the police could do that anyway, so it's not necessarily part of decrim. I think that every reform that we've met is like this, like the original safe injection site in North America, Insight, that we got, almost 20 years now. That came from a fight, that came from civil disobedience law breaking. And, it wasn't everything we wanted. It was partway, it was like a reform. Every reform is going to be like that. So you got to understand that a reform is what a social movement wins, and the fight goes on. So they're good and they're bad. They're just like a partway step on the way to somewhere else.
With the 2.5 grams, like, do they just the police eyeball that?
Yep.
Is that okay? So that can be really subjective too, I guess. That's.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, the last comment on that, though, is if you're in British Columbia, like I said, police are supposed to have taken training. It's not mandatory everywhere. They all have different interpretations. Police often have different interpretations of the law as it already was, and they have discretion on when and how to act. So we're not giving you any kind of guarantee of what's going to happen if you're caught with drugs in BC. We don't know. It's just that's what the law says now. But we've all experienced the cops kind of coloring outside the lines.
Mm-hmm. I heard you in there talking about how going after the source, going after the dealer has led to this problem of stronger and stronger opioids. Can you talk a bit about the reality of that? Maybe your beginnings with using heroin to where drugs are at now. Can you explain
Sure.
how?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly used heroin. I used lots of opioids, but it was mostly heroin. And now I mostly use methadone. And I got across from heroin to methadone because they were a lot closer to each other than, say, methadone is to fentanyl. Fentanyl is a lot stronger than heroin. So I think it's a lot tougher for people to use something like methadone right now than it was for me. So I'm lucky that I was trying to make a change at the time that I did. It's a different world now, since heroin is like very difficult to find now, and it's sort of like a niche taste, it's disappeared for about 10 years. Over that time, it started to disappear. Now it's mostly gone. So it's still possible to find, but quite difficult. It's all fentanyl now and fentanyl analogs, and a lot of the dope is mixed with benzodiazepines. And so they call it benzodope now, like atizolam and stuff like that. So the combination of benzodiazepines and opioids together has a synergistic effect that makes it stronger than either one, or stronger than they just are additively. So the overdoses come more often, and they are complex. So you can still use naloxone or Narcan, but that only works on the opioid part of the overdose. The person is still kind of in a benzo coma almost when they come out of it. You have to watch someone's breathing for several hours. Like my best friend overdosed in the middle of December, and I found him on the floor of the kitchen, and I had to watch him for several hours. And but when I found him, I just thought, oh my God, is he dead? It was terrifying. And we've all had those experiences right now. Of course, he doesn't remember very much of it. Benzos, in combination with the opioids, can give you memory loss for the time you're using them, and it's creating lots of complex effects. And I just feel lucky all the time that I'm not still using street dope, or I would be, I'd surely be in the line of fire for that sort of thing. And because we're not getting on with fixing this, it won't just stop at benzodope. So I explained how we moved from heroin to fentanyl, and then fentanyl to benzodope. And each time people don't want it. They're looking for the old stuff. They're looking for what they're used to. But eventually, because they can't find it, they get wired to it. They get addicted to it, and then they need it. And so you have a market, a coerced market of drug users who mostly just wanted heroin, who are now addicted to fentanyl and benzos together. But that won't be the last contaminant. Lots of places in the U.S. have xylazine in the dope, which is like a horse and cattle tranquilizer, and they call it trank dope. And it can give you seizures and give you terrible, can kill the skin tissue and give you these horrible wounds and all that. And that's starting to come here too. Like we get a couple of detections for that at drug testing places per week here. And so I'm not sure how long it is before that happens. But you see these sort of extreme combinations of exotic drugs together make it harder and harder for us to do safe supply, right? Because it's like, what are we going to try and find a safe source of cattle tranquilizer to substitute for people? I think that most people don't want to do that. I bet you doctors don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the longer that the government takes to actually get out there and create a low barrier safe supply program across the country, the more that the street supply is going to move on to more and more exotic combinations, and the harder this gets, until I worry that we might not have much of a move left,
Okay. Yeah, because I do volunteer work in like a free store, but it ends up doubling as kind of a drop-in center. And we get people coming in there talking about their experiences with overdoses, and the stories have been getting they've been changing, like especially when it comes to how much naloxone they have to give someone. It's been going up and up, and even out here there's noticeable changes in the reactions and the overdoses over the last few years.
Oh, I'm sure
compared
you
to
guys have Benzodope there too. You know what?
probably.
The weird thing is what happens in Vancouver. I don't know if it's because we're a port city or whatever, but we're like a bellwether. Like we're an early warning system. The things that happen here tend to happen a little bit later, just but everywhere. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm sure it's not that way for everything. We're just maybe one of a few places that are like that. But I have noticed this through the course of my life. That we're like the canary in the coal mine often.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, well, I'm just looking at a letter a friend of mine wrote to the local newspaper, and she's talking about what it's been like receiving messages that people we know are dying. But there's a part in it where she talks about who better to explain the situation than those people who are with the lived experience. But it's an idea that to me is kind of like the seed for something like Vandu or Dolph here, because I'm thinking you can have them explain their lives to people and then expect those people to do something about that. But it seems like drug user groups take that a step further, and you start actually doing stuff yourself. And I'm just wondering if you could explain a bit about how those groups start.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we got to do it ourselves, right? No one else is coming to save us. Every reform in drug policy that's happened out here is because we forced it, because we broke the law first, because we opened our own underground, not official safe injection sites, and then said, hey, oh yeah, you don't like it? It's illegal? Come and arrest us then. Either open one officially or come get us. And, we had to call their bluff. Same with needle exchange. Same with safe supply right now. We're doing it illegally first, And this is just a long tradition of civil disobedience that certainly wasn't invented by us. We just notice how other social movements organize themselves, other movements of marginalized people. But the very first step is getting people together in a group, in some kind of a movement. And Vandu started in a park. Just having people come out and give pizza and say, hey, what's happening? What are the things that are most concerning to people? Back then it was cops, that was a big thing. It's always a big thing. Cops and overdoses and HIV, and so that's where we started. You just got to do it every week, same time every week. Some people are going to be like, what the hell? Who are these people? What's going on? Get some money so you can give people $5 or $10 for coming to one of these things, because they would be otherwise trying to grind up the money to get what they need for the day, and asking people to take an hour out of the grind can leave them dope sick. So we always gave that stipend. We always give that. It's a small amount of money, and sometimes people just come for the money at first, but then sometimes they find that they're really interested and they become organizers and leaders. The first meeting I went to way back in the day, I was at the back of the room. I just had my ball cap pulled low. It's just like I didn't really have anything to say. I didn't feel like I had the right to be there. I was very ashamed. And now I'm on one of the boards of one of the groups that's part of Vandu. I'm on the board of the BC Association of People on Opioid Maintenance. Used to be called Association of People on Methadone. Lots and lots of people have gone through that same thing, and being a part of that group has lifted the shame off of me. I just used to be so embarrassed of my own self. Just felt like such a scumbag for being a drug user, and would never talk about it publicly, never get on a podcast like this and talk about anything like that. But I'm also lucky that I've got myself into housing and a job and all those situations where it is safe to do it, where I won't get fired or evicted or whatever for speaking out. So I certainly understand why people don't, and I respect that. And you don't have to be part of a group and part of a movement. You can keep your story to yourself and just share it with people who are in the group, and you don't have to be the person who talks on the mic. You can be the person who organizes a demonstration, the person who runs the injection room. We have a injection room in the back of Vandu where people can use safe, and there's so many roles in a movement that people can find the one that best suits them. But I think that there's no progress without a movement. Nothing really happens very good without a movement demanding that it do, and starting a movement is hard, but you just hold that meeting every week. Eventually you got a whole bunch of things that people have said that they're interested in, like police or overdoses or HIV or whatever, maybe trank dope or whatever it is. And then you get to the point where you're like, right, let's write a manifesto, let's write a mission statement, let's become a group. And people will go through that transition because now they have a stake in it. And then eventually Vandu got a physical place to meet and be, and got more serious funding and all that. But the first thing is the people. You just make a rank and file group that's like rooted somewhere. Hyper local organizing is really important. Like the people in Vandu know the downtown east side so well. I live on the east side of Vancouver, but not on the downtown east side. And they just know every block, everything that's going on. Hyper local rooted organizing is absolutely the way to go. And I learned this from Ann Livingston, who was a co-founder of Vandu and a great organizer of drug user groups everywhere and safe injection sites everywhere. And Ann takes one of those big flip charts, they're like a big, like a giant pad of paper, and you put them on a stand at the front of a group of people. When the people are talking, you write down the things that they're saying, like you don't have to write verbatim, but all of a sudden people who haven't been heard really before, like, oh, I'm in a meeting where my point was registered, and everybody sees that up there, and it sort of changes the dynamic a little bit. You just keep doing that every week.
Is there anything related to these topics that you want to get in there or want to
Sure.
say?
I think about Vancouver, we've been doing this for a long time here, like for a generation. And a lot of places, this is their first experience with a toxic drug crisis. They don't have any drug user organizing. Maybe they don't have any harm reduction services. And so the struggle in a place like that will look a lot different than in Vancouver. Like the local conditions are what's going to, characterize the struggle. Like you're going to have to be responding to, like if you have a different politics of the people who are, in charge of the city, the mayor or whatever, some residents group or something like that. And so the demands that you raise and the tactics that you use might be different than here. And that doesn't make them wrong or anything like that. It's like we don't know because we don't live there, right? So we just have picked the tactics that seemed at the time appropriate to this place. But everyone's fight is going to look a little bit different. And maybe like the fight for some places where it gets to be 40 below, the first fight is just somewhere warm. I don't know, I just know mostly that drug use is like everywhere. Overdoses are everywhere. Most people's overdoses are found at home alone. That's where people die. Half of them were getting up for work the next day. So if that's the problem you're setting out to solve, bringing people together is right everywhere. So the tactics might look different, but the principle of organizing a community, that's right everywhere.
The other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on is your music and what's happening there, because Legally Blind, what I've heard, I love. And you said you're moving on with something else?
Yeah, the pandemic was so hard for music, right? Like there was just like years where we couldn't rehearse, we couldn't play out anywhere. So I was just making the podcast at home, and this guy, James Ash, who was the drummer for an awesome Canadian punk band called I Spy.
This isn't business, it's a hope and it's a voice and not a product. So tell them that you can't be bought, I don't want corporate backing. $500,000 a year, that's not what it's about. It's something so much more than money. This is relative to what they don't belong here. Do you really think that this shit belongs to us? It's finally Sunday we control, it won't be torn away. It won't be torn away. What's the message said? Does it really mean a thing when your actions contradict your words?
From the split 10-inch titled I'd Rather Be Flag Burning, I Spy released with Propagandhi. On Recess Records, that was Appliances and Cars. While checking to see if there was any I Spy presence on the internet, I noticed that Recess Records has some of their Revenge of the Little Shits 10 inches going for $6 American each. If you are a record collector, that's quite a deal, so check out the link in the episode description.
He was like helping us make music for the podcast, and then Sam, who's a producer on the podcast, he also plays guitar. So my other band, Legally Blind, the old band, kind of fell apart in the pandemic, and the drummer had a couple of kids and was just like completely busy all the time. So me and Sam and James and the bass player from Legally Blind, Kai Paulson, we all formed together this new band, and just kind of, we brought our influences together. Like, I like that old Jawbreaker kind of East Bay punk sound. It's what I grew up with. I can't help it.
What's the score? Got a friend, a name is Boxcar. Cigarettes and beer and alcohol. Hair blue, now it's gray. Like the mind she hates the same. My enemies are all too familiar. They're the ones who start calling. What's the score?
That was Jawbreaker with Boxcar. Links in the description to find out more about the music.
Sam is really into Radiohead. James is into everything, and Kai likes like Frank Zappa and stuff like that. So we were just like squishing that all together. And, we have Sam on lead guitar, I'm rhythm and vocals, and got a good rhythm section. And so we all write songs together, and we're kind of experimenting with weird like ghost country shit and just, I don't know, messing around, and it's great. We played a few gigs, played a great gig in November at Black Lab, and it was sold out, and had a really good time. So I'm glad to be in a band that's full of energy and good politics, and back to playing shows hopefully. And music has saved my fucking life. I swear to God, music and heroin together probably saved my life. I was like a depressed, I think suicidal kid. Those things, really gave me hope. So I just recommend anybody out there who has any kind of musical inclination at all. I didn't say talent, because I don't hold myself to that, but any kind of like inclination, make a band,
I agree 100% on that. My life's been saved many times over by music. So yeah.
Nice.
What was the name of the new project again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said it. I didn't say it at all. It's Low Dead Space.
Okay.
And this comes from some kind of syringe manufacturer that says that they promote their syringe because it's got low dead space. The dead space in a syringe is that last little place right before the needle where a drop of dope or whatever, just, you can't get it out. It's always going to be stuck there. And also like, viruses from blood or whatever. So like the needle that has low dead space is more efficient. We just thought that was sort of like a bleak, dreary sounding name. Or I did, and I liked it. So, and then nobody could come up with a better one. So it just kind of stuck.
You don't have any recordings yet, right? Like,
Not yet. Maybe I could send you a bit of a live one or something like that. But
that would be really cool. I'd love to hear that.
Thanks. I will do. I will. I'll send you a little bit of our weird ghost country song. We were messing around with a song called Steve Earle. You know, he's a old country guy, but he played a sponsor, like an AA sponsor, an NA sponsor on The Wire, that TV show. Anyway, and we just the song is like, well, if Steve Earle was my sponsor, maybe 12-step would have worked for me too. If I could be writing songs with this cool old guy instead of like getting a lecture on my moral defects, maybe I would have liked it better. So we made a country song about that, and I'll send you a little bit of that.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Garth for the interview. Check the description wherever you are listening to this for links to more information about Crackdown Podcast, the issues we were speaking about, and the music you heard. That's Low Dead Space working out If Steve Earle Was My Sponsor. Visit Wood-stein.ca. That's WOOD-STEIN.ca. You can support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Colin Burrows. Like, share, comment, follow, and support Wood-stein Media and this podcast, and have a wonderful day, no matter what kind of shit you have to deal with.
Maybe I could have walked down 12 steps, find God and avoid the fire. Judge told me, son, you get clean. It wouldn't look me in the eye. He said, see you again, son. With that crooked smile now. And Steve Earle was my sponsor. Locking the purples on the wire. Maybe I could make my friends out. Maybe I wouldn't be a liar. But I know heroin is my higher power. It's how I got it this far. It's how I'm past the hours now. Steve Earle was my sponsor. Locking the purples on the wire. He showed me how to write a song. He showed me something true and fine now. Yes.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Take it easy.